welcome to the public lecture series, our second one today, this week, pardon me. And Dr. Naresh Agarwal, an associate professor at Simmons College, is going to speak on the idea of impermanence and the power of now. Please welcome Professor Agarwal.
Thank you so much, Joe. So how many of you have heard this term, impermanence? Can you tell me what you think it is?
It's sort of like an experience or understanding that there's like change in life.
So it's change, right? Okay.
When you think of the word permanent, that's very static or solid. And so this word is more free flow of something.
It's like a free flow, okay. What else?
So really it's dynamic and there's loss. But also gain.
It's a loss, right? Gain. Maybe flux,
Flux.
right? So now, think for a moment of your own life until now, and think of how many things have remained constant since the time you were a child. So what are the things that have remained the same?
It could be maybe a personality type, like curious. You know, always since a child curious, still today curious.
Okay.
Probably
so,
what
so
brought
always
me here.
curious, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
Name.
The name, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Not always though.
Some,
Sometimes it
depending
changes.
on the person.
Yeah. And what has changed? And not just in you, around you as well. In your surroundings, in the people around you, or the people around you, not just in them, but the people themselves, the places you've lived and worked, the streets, the seasons,
Aging.
aging,
Yeah.
or growing up, right? Now, even though you might think that how you look today resembles how you looked when you were a child, or how you looked 2 years ago, actually the cells in your body are completely different than what they were 2 years ago. So every single cell in our body renews itself, and we actually become completely different people because of the way we eat and the nutrients we get. But the very idea is that there are two things happening at the same time. There's the part of us which is constantly changing. Every interaction I have with you changes me. Every time. Now, the fact that you are here in this talk, and the person you will go back after this talk will be two completely different people, because this interaction would have changed you in ways in which you may not realize right now. And even, it's not just about this talk, but every interaction that you have with anybody changes you in ways, and those changes happen to us on a daily basis. Every sight we see, every article we read, every person we talk to, is a constant flow that's happening. And at the same time, some things remain the same. So there is this balance of things changing and things remaining permanent, or so-called at least permanent to a certain extent within ourselves, that kind of goes on. Now the question is about which part of it do we focus on more? I just came back now from a remembrance meeting where we all sat and remembered Professor Robin Peake, who died some time ago. And Robin and I had a lot of interactions last year and in the years before that. And people, as they were sharing stories, it was very simple stories about restaurants to eat and things about the discussions over which courses to offer and whatnot. It was very common and normal conversations that faculty have with each other, and sometimes when you have with friends. But when I got the news of Robin's passing earlier this year, the thing that struck me most was that in all my conversations with her, there was never this feeling that she was going to die. Not from me, but from her side as well. It was all about the normal day-to-day grudges and the normal day-to-day experiences and things that the normal conversations that we have. And one thing that we forget at that point in time is that none of us here is impermanent in that sense. That is a part of it that we most commonly identify with on a daily basis. And that was the main message I got from that. And when we talk about this idea of impermanence, right, that's a central idea in Buddhism, but I think it's a central idea in a lot of religions as well. But it is the understanding that everything that we know, the way it is in a constant state of change. And we don't think about it. Like every time we have something going on, like the economy is going through a difficult time, or when we have that the libraries need to cut budgets or something, that is the time when we talk about change. But even in the absence of those kinds of things, change is happening on a daily basis, even though we might not recognize it as change. A new person coming in, some person leaving, somebody getting a job will change your life events in different ways, and things the way you know it might change after that. Or even the fact that you joined Simmons and you came here, that would have changed your lifestyle in different ways than what it had been just before that. So the only thing really permanent is impermanence. That is the one thing that we live with. And I'll talk about The Power of Now, which is a book by Eckhart Tolle. And is that how you pronounce it, Tolle? Yeah, and Jesse and I, we were both reading parts of the book, and we were discussing that. But that book has, what it does is that it takes a lot of these messages and puts it in a format which is very easy to understand, which makes it very easy to relate to, and that's one reason why I found the book so powerful. And when the opportunity came to give a talk, I thought it would be a good thing to speak on. So one thing to do on an almost daily basis, if possible, or at least periodically, is to contemplate on the impermanence of it all. And if you really look at life, right? You can think of it as a carousel. So how many of you have ever sat on a carousel? So typically you have the little horses, right? In here. And then it kind of goes round and round, and you have people and children a lot of times getting in and getting off from there, right? So I often like to see the world as a carousel. The idea is that this is constantly moving all the time, but the people in it are different. So you have people who will get off quickly or will stay here for a longer period, and then you'll have some other people who will come in and continue, and then some people will come off as well. The problem is that when we are on it, we think we're the center of this carousel, and we'll never get off. And every time a person that we know is on the carousel on the other horse over here, when that person gets off, we get very surprised. How can that happen? Like, how could it happen that this person got off? I only met this person the last week. And that's one thing which always surprises us. But if you think about it, that's the one thing which should not surprise us, because that's only reality. Because even if people disagree on a lot of things, the one thing that people are forced to agree on is that every person who was ever born is going to die, and every person who has ever lived has died. So in that sense, but in the scheme of things, this wheel here keeps moving, so you can call it the wheel of time, which is always there. And here you have people going in and people who are getting off. So contemplating this, right, is an important part of this talk, I think, and in understanding of life as well. One thing that I often think about is the story of the Titanic. And do you know how many people died in the sinking?
2,000?
So around somewhere around 1,500 people or so, I think, yeah. And that was in the year 1912, right? So when those people died, a lot of the people must have been very sad across the world, with all the friends and families and people who read about it in the papers. But I think of not the people who died, I think of all the people who are alive everywhere across the world at that point in time. So do you think any of them is alive today? People who talked about the sinking of the Titanic, and people who mourned the loss of the people who might have died. So even if they were alive, even if there was a child who was just born then, that child would be 103 years old today. And all the people who were big enough to understand the events at that point in time are most likely dead by now. So that event, what it does is that it at least brings focus to this whole idea of impermanence, that everybody, even though people die in certain events and people might die in different ways, but the very fact that everybody who's going to be born is going to die is an important reminder. Now, why is this sad way of looking at things such an important thing? And that is because of this so-called stress that we have in our lives. Have you ever gotten stressed? So what causes stress in your lives? What are the things that cause stress? Sure.
Running out of time.
Okay, deadlines? So is it the deadlines or not able to meet the deadlines which causes the stress?
Now that you're talking about it, those first 4 letters are now striking to me. I'm like, that's how you feel.
Okay. So try to think of the most difficult moments in your life. I will not ask you to spell those out, but just think of those most difficult moments and how you felt during those moments, and what do you think caused it? Or what events caused you to feel those moments? Was there a loss? And is that loss always death?
Not necessarily the literal death of someone, but there is, I think, a grieving and a loss that comes with things that seem like a loss.
Seem like loss. So it could also be a breaking of relationship, or it could be of someone going away, or things not remaining the same. Right? So change could happen in different ways. But a lot of the times when you find that the difficult moments that have happened in your lives, right, you'll notice that it was because of change. That things, the way you knew it until that point, changed. And that change was the one which caused all those emotions. Right? Because you were not able to accept that change at that point in time. And with the passing of time, there was acceptance, and then you might have found a greater peace with time, even though at that moment when it was happening, it was very difficult. So it is, so most of the time, right, it is this whole idea of change, which we're not able to prepare ourselves for, and which we're not able to accept when it happens. And I'm not sure whether it is possible to fully prepare oneself for change, because even though we might anticipate various things, some things might just happen out of the blue, and we might not be prepared for it. But at the same time, if we were to spend our times contemplating on impermanence, that everything is impermanent, and then I think when that change happens, you just see it as a manifestation of that impermanence. So this is the typical life cycle of a butterfly, right? Who doesn't live for very many days, but while it lives, it's very beautiful. And it goes through the cycle as well. And now that fall is coming, we'll soon be seeing this across New England. And when you see cherry blossoms, right, again they look very beautiful when spring is there. But again, this comes as well. The flowers that you hold very dear, they again wither as well. But when we talk about change, it's not just the loss as well. Because this is going to renew and this is going to get into a fresh flower again. So it's a whole cycle. It might not be that very same flower, but it will be a different flower, which will again bud and grow up. So while we talk about the idea of death, there's also the idea of birth. Right? That there are babies being born and suddenly they grow up and they become an integral part of our lives. And then suddenly, before you know it, like you feel that how could you have lived without them? So it's while you lose people, you also gain people. And while you lose relationships, you also gain relationships. Or some relationships become different. So when that happens, right, there's a constant renewal that's going on. So this was a watercolor painting. The resolution is not very nice over here. That I just calculated today. It was like 18 years ago that I painted this. But it was a painting of two women grinding corn, and it was by a visiting a British artist who was going around India at that point in time in British India in the mid 1800s, and he was trying to capture the day-to-day lives of people, and that was and he had done a series of watercolor paintings. So I tried to copy that, but what it shows over here is a grinding stone. So the way it works is that, have any of you seen this in real life? No? So the way it works is that it's pretty much like a coffee grinder right now. But it used to work by hand. There's a small place opening on top, and then you take wheat or you take corn, and then you put it over here, and then you sort of take it around. And what comes out from here is ground flour. Yeah, and most houses would have it because that's how they would get their flour to make the bread. So in 16th century India, there was this saint who wrote a lot of very simple two-line poems, and he was very famous for that. And what he used to look at is he used to look at daily lives of people and write metaphors actually, and those metaphors would have a bigger meaning behind it, but it would be based on very simple observations. And one of the two lines that he wrote was that, looking at the grinding stones in motion, Kabir started crying, and in between the two circular stones, nothing stays intact. Okay, so he was looking at wheat, and he was just observing that every single grain of wheat which is going in there is actually getting completely crushed and then coming out. But the bigger metaphor of this grinding stone over here is the carousel that we talked about, or the wheel of time. And he's looking at a grain of wheat as every human being. But every human being who is born, and here these two slabs of stone can be seen as the earth and the sky, or they can be seen as other dualities such as happiness and sadness, and light and dark, and the changing seasons and all that. But in between these dualities, he says that every person and every creature that goes in there does not come out alive. It gets crushed and comes out alive. Gets crushed and then comes out. So that was the whole metaphor behind this, and he has written a lot of the metaphors as well. I think there are various books on his poetries, but and each one has a deep meaning behind it. So this is just one of them, and later I'll show you another one. And one important discovery that I made was a Wikipedia article on a topic called dukkha. Okay. And I often like to talk about happiness, but one thing that I understood is that you cannot really understand happiness if you do not understand suffering. So for you to really appreciate what happiness is, you need to appreciate and understand suffering. And this Wikipedia article was nice because it was very simple, and it was based on the teachings of the Buddha, and it had laid down the various forms of suffering. And I try to summarize some aspects of it. So here the word dukkha can imply suffering, it can imply anxiety, it can imply unsatisfactory, being uncertain about things, or being dissatisfied, a whole range of emotions surrounding suffering, or even stress for that matter. So this was one of the 3 patterns which were identified in that article. And that was dukkha as ordinary suffering. So the obvious physical and mental suffering associated with birth, growing old, illness and dying. And I think this goes with the story of the Buddha as well. When he was a young prince, Siddhartha, he was going around. Do you know the story of the Buddha? He was raised in a very secluded environment, and his father did not want him to see any of the hardships of life. And one fine day he went out and he saw a sick man, and he had never seen disease. And then he went around and then he saw somebody taking the corpse of a dead person, and he saw death. And at last he found a monk, and then that monk was very peaceful. And that's when he decides to leave his wife and child and leave all the riches of the palace. But the observation from this story is that there is discomfort and pain associated with all these, even in the birth of a child, as well as with growing old, with disease. And sometimes when none of these happen, we just create discord in our lives by arguing and fighting over simple things. So we always choose to create all the situations. And second form of suffering, which I found the most interesting, was dukkha as produced by change. So the anxiety or stress of trying to hold on to things that are constantly changing. Have you ever felt this?
I didn't want to get off the carousel, stayed on the horse.
Not just you don't want the other person to come out of the carousel as well, and you want things to remain exactly the way it is, and we don't want to change. And especially if things are going well, and if you like those things. So for instance, if you see a beautiful rose, you like it, you really like it, you get attracted to it, and then you want it to stay that way. So what you do is that you pluck it, and then you pour some liquid metal on it, so it stays that way forever. But it's no longer the same rose after that, which you got attracted to in the first place. And that happens very often in relationships. That very soon we reach a stage where you start demanding, you start controlling. It's like, where were you since morning? Is that a normal conversation, right? Why didn't you respond to my messages? Right? So all of it, suddenly we start considering the person to be answerable to us. Right? And when that happens, we are basically, we do not want things to change, and every time things don't go as the way we want it to be, we start getting stressed. And even when things go the way we want it to be, we are still stressed because we think that this moment will be over. And we are more worried about the moment getting over than enjoying the moment itself. And the third is the dukkha of conditioned states, which is a basic unsatisfactoriness pervading all forms of existence, because things are changing and impermanent. And he says that most human beings kind of feel this as something missing kind of all the time. So let's look more closely on this one, the second one. Dukkha is produced by change. So really all of our suffering arises out of a futile attempt to make permanent that which is inherently impermanent. So if you look back at specific events in your life, and when I asked you to think of the most painful times that you've been through, you'll realize that you really wanted things to be permanent and not to change. And when we are not able to accept the change, that's what really makes us suffer. Right? Because we have not spent enough time contemplating on the very changing nature of things around us, because that's a core property of the world that we live in. And since everybody goes through change and everything around us is changing. And when we fail to see that, when we want things to remain exactly the way it is, that is what causes the most stress and the suffering that we experience. So here, the dukkha is produced by change, right? Can be broken down into 2 or 3 categories. One is getting what you don't want, right? Being unable to avoid difficult or painful situations. So being stuck in a job that you don't like, being stuck in a relationship that you are not happy with, or being stuck in situations that you don't want to be. You're in the tea and the tea breaks down, right? That's what you don't want. A lot of people go through the depression when winter approaches, because you do not want the fall to end and you want it to stay the same way. And I remember when I first joined Simmons, I think after the first or second winter, I got very tired of the snow, especially the shoveling. And I remember getting very stressed and thinking that when is the snow going to go away? And finally, after a lot of trying, I realized that the snow is not going to go away. So I decided to be friends with snow. So I said, okay, let's be friends and stay as long as you want to. And I do not want you to go, I want you to stay forever now. And the moment I started thinking in that direction, the stress vanished. And snow, of course, went with its own time with the changing of seasons. But it's when you want things to go in a different manner. So there are 2 things over here. One is the way things are, right, or way something is, and the other is the way we think it should be, or the way we want it to be. There is a constant war between these 2. And most of the stress that we go through is because of this idea of the should be that we have, this big idea. You should not be behaving in this manner in front of me, right? This is something very common that we hear people say. Or things should, so the things should not be in this manner. This is not what I expect from you. All of these, right? It's just this whole idea of how things should be, which we think that we have somehow mastered the idea of right and wrong. And we feel that what we know and what we think is the right thing to do, and what someone else is doing is not the right thing to do. And we want that person to come to our idea of what we think is right. And that is what causes most of the discord, because the notion of what is right is actually being negotiated. Every person has a different notion of what is right and what is wrong. And sometimes society as a whole decides as to what is right. And we put it up into law books. So different people at different points in time have negotiated the idea of right and wrong. And whenever people have spoken up against that idea of right and wrong, those have been seen as different or not the right ones. And after a point in time, once it becomes acceptable, then that becomes right. But most of the discord is between what is and what should be. And happiness actually resides at this level. And stress resides at this level. So if you look at the definition of stress, right, it really is the gap between what is and what we think should be. So the more we narrow this gap, the more our stress vanishes. The more we start accepting things the way they are. So the second point here is not being able to hold on to what is desirable. The pain of trying to hold on to what is desirable, lovely, is terrific, right? So you really like something, you don't want to lose it. And that causes a lot of stress, it causes a lot of suffering. And this happens a lot when you get deeply attached to something or to someone, right? And again, I'll speak to that. There's this whole notion of attachment. And love. Because the word I thought will come to that. And the second is not getting what you do want. So this underlies the previous two categories, anxiety of not getting what you want. But basically, whenever we get things we don't want, or we fear losing things that we do want, that is when we get stressed as well. And that causes a lot of suffering. So now comes the idea of attachment and love. So I think before we get to this slide, what do you think is the difference between the two? Or is there a difference?
There's a tremendous difference.
There is?
Yeah. So I think when you love something, you want to enrich it. You want to enrich it and share with it.
You want to it?
Like share and enrich.
Share, enrich, okay.
Maybe build something.
Build something?
Yeah, like have like a synergy between the two different things, whatever it is, whether it's like organizations or two people in love, like.
Okay. And attachment, what do you think is that?
It's more about how you feel and react as opposed to sharing.
Okay.
So it's more internal.
So with love, you get that, common phrase of unconditional love. And so what I take that as, which is, I have a newborn who isn't going to be able to share with me, but I will still love them unconditionally. And it ties into what you're saying about the shock, that all of a sudden you can be shocked if you have problems with that unconditional love too. Because you might think that's what you're supposed to be doing, and you might have trouble with that too. So, but in terms of love, I think there's that unconditional piece to it, because that other person might not be able to provide it back to you.
So the difference between the attachment and love, right? Attachment is always about myself, where you're thinking more about yourself than about the other person. How can I live without you? Right? So it's because you are more attached. But the idea of love is more thinking more about the other person. What the other person wants, and what is best for the other person. It's not so much about yourself at that point. Right? And most people confuse attachment with love a lot, and we use the term love very easily. Like I love grapes, for instance. Is that the same as love in that sense? So here it says, so many people confuse attachment with love. So one big part of attachment is fear. So there can be various levels of attachment, right? You can be very attached to a child, to a friend, to a parent, to a lover, all of it. And a big part of the attachment is the fear of losing. And we talked about that earlier stage of the dukkha is produced by change, in terms of afraid of losing what you think is desirable. And the deeper the attachment, the deeper the fear. And any simple thing or any event which can always make this fear really stronger in the minds. And what happens in attachment is that you start losing your own sense of self. Now people like to say that when two people are in love, one very common phrase used is that you complete me. And that's the wrong phrase to use. So rather than saying you complete me, a better phrase to use is that I'm complete and I want to share my completeness with you. Right? So when you say that you complete me, the implication is that I'm incomplete. So when you're incomplete, which means that you will not let the other person be at peace. Whenever the other person is trying to do something, you're constantly incomplete at that point, and you're not secure in your relationship. So what is happening over here is that you are deriving your happiness from that person, and you have stopped deriving that happiness from yourself now at that stage. And so one thing to keep in mind is that whenever we go through those kinds of emotions, right, is rather than trying to blame the person, we have to realize the root of who is creating it. Are all these emotions being created because of a certain behavior or action by that person? Or are we creating these emotions within ourselves? So who is responsible for it? So a lot of the times we find it very, very easy to blame the other person. And it can be a very simple thing, like when you send a text message and you don't get a response back right away. Right? And that idea of how soon is changing a lot. Earlier 24 or 48 hours used to be acceptable. Before that, months would be acceptable when you send snail mail, right? And now it can be a few seconds. If you wait for a few minutes, which means that the person doesn't love you anymore. Right? So what is happening is that we are being guided a lot by our fear, and we are seeking to control a lot of the times because we're not letting that person blossom and just be the way the person wants to be. So attachments are about fear and dependency, and have more to do with love of self than love of another. And love without attachment is the purest form of love, because it's really about what you give to the other person than what you get. So there have been a lot of researchers looking at attachment, and this particular matrix is from a paper by Bartholomew and Horowitz in 1991. So they looked at the attachment styles among young adults, and they classified it into 4 quadrants. So on one quadrant there's a thoughts of self, and the other quadrant is the thought of the partner. So if you think highly of if you have positive emotions about yourself and positive emotions about the partner or the person you're attached to, then you feel secure. So you're comfortable in the person's company, but you're also comfortable alone. So in either case, you're happy. On the other hand, if you get so attached that you lose your sense of self, and that you start being happy only during the times when you're with the other person and not alone at all. So you start developing a self where you're afraid to be alone. Where every time you don't like your own company anymore after that. And when that happens, so you have a positive image of the other person but a negative one of yourself. So you're completely preoccupied with relationships at that stage. So in the third quadrant, you have a positive image of yourself, but a negative one of the other person, and that's when you start being dismissive of any company, any intimacy, and you become strongly independent. And the fourth one is when you think negatively of yourself and negatively of the other person, and here you're fearful of intimacy and you're socially avoidant, and you're constantly blaming, and you spend most of your life and most of the time being in fear. So the question then is really of our own thoughts, is to decide which of these 4 quadrants would you want to live on a daily basis in all the relationships that we have. And this is an image of Thich Nhat Hanh, and he is a Vietnamese monk. And I found that listening to him is very, very calming. I just discovered him by chance one day when looking at an opera show. I think so Oprah had an interview with him, and he was a contemporary of Martin Luther King, and in 1967 actually Martin Luther King nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he lives in France, and he's a Zen master, and he spends a lot of his time on meditating and in mindfulness. So he has a lot of things where they get into groups and they do things like mindful walking, where as a group you walk together. So do you know what mindfulness means, or any thoughts on that?
Being aware focused on whatever experience you're having at the time you're having it.
Yes, so as you ate that grape, right? How mindful were you of the grape? Of the size, of the taste, completely, right? So a simple experience like eating a grape can be a great exercise in mindfulness. Or things like being in a class, listening to someone or talking to someone. So all of it is like, the idea is to give you 100% to that activity, even if it's a very simple activity. And what we do is that a lot of the times we try to multitask these days. We try to do multiple things at one time, and we think we're good at it, but we actually become less productive in trying to do that. So there are these articles over here, one on WordPress, and this is the Oprah interview over here. And do a Google search on Thich Nhat Hanh. There are lots of talks by him. But you'll find that every single thing he says is very empowering. And he talks about the idea of love as to love without knowing how to love wounds the person we love. And we find that we do a lot of wounding in our day-to-day lives. Rather than love being that great force which is supposed to heal everyone, we actually do it without thinking, and then we actually wound the person who we think we love. Because we are always trying to think of ourselves. In every action, we are guided by fear, we are guided by jealousy, we are guided by all of the negative emotions, rather than by trust. So this is what I wrote in May, but it's that I realized that life is just happiness, and we create the sadness and other negative emotions by holding on to the past very tightly and being anxious about the future and refusing to relish the present moment. So if you look at people, right, even though we think we know people, we only know them at a particular point in time based on our interaction with them at a certain point. Okay? And since then, a lot of things would have happened. Every interaction, every experience would have shaped them and changed them in different ways. And they are not the same person anymore, which we think we knew. And we are not the same persons anymore as well. So imagine this river, and imagine each one of you as this moving river. So you might have places where it's slightly stagnant for some point, but it's still flowing down. And if we look at people as these flowing rivers, right, then we will not be stressed anymore. Because you're looking at impermanence in every person that you see. And you're looking at impermanence in yourself as well. And by trying to experience this impermanence, every single day is a new experience. Because how can you hold moving rivers and expect it to be the same? And when we realize and see people as these moving rivers, there's really no reason to be sad or no reason to be stressed, because every day is a new experience. And every day, what we see each day is these different moments in the journey of these different rivers that are there. So the present moment really is what we have at any given point in time. And this is where this book by Tolle comes in, The Power of Now. And I found the book very empowering. When you read the introduction to the book, what he writes is that until the age of 30 or so, he used to be very anxious all the time. And a lot of the times, he had suicidal thoughts as well. And he was depressed and he was sad and anxious. And one fine day, things got so bad that he decided, that he thought that I can't live with myself anymore. And at that moment he said, wait a minute, if I can't live with myself, who is this myself that I cannot live with? So then he thought, so this was the state kind of that he was experiencing at that point. But the idea that dawned to him was that, is there one of me or two of me within me? And that is the central thesis of Tolle's book. And isn't it a scary thought? Imagine there are two people inside you, rather than one person.
Barely manage one person.
They barely manage the one person, right? We're always trying to think of ourselves as this person who has a big view of the world, who has achieved so much, and who has struggled through things and still survived and done well, and has friends and family and all of it. Right? That's a whole sense of self that we get based on our combined experiences in life until this point. And then to think of, is there another person as well within us? Yeah. And this is this whole idea that comes in. So he calls it, one of this person is the mind, and the other is what he calls the being. So in certain books and in certain religions, this being is called God, or is called the soul in some places. And he did not really want to use the word God because he thought it's been misused and it has certain connotations. So he thought being was a more independent term. And again, the mind has different terms as well. Ego being one of them. So we have parts of a body, right? We have a head, we have our hands, we have our feet, we have different parts of our body. But we don't see our mind as a part of our body. We see our mind as us, right? So while we have our hands, I'm using my hand to hold this marker right now, but I don't think I'm my hand. The hand is mine, but I am not my hand. And so this comes to the mind as well. The mind is mine, but I am not my mind. So most of the things that you realize, most of the hard situations or the difficult times that we go through in our lives is because of one very dangerous person who's living inside us, which is our mind. And this mind is great at making us feel insecure. And how does it do it? It does this by living in two states. One is the past, and the other is the future. And the being likes to remain in the present. So you notice one thing, that most of your fears and anxieties and your stress is not really caused by you sitting on this table right now with all the nice food in front of you and listening to this talk, but it is really based on what you think might happen tomorrow, or how you're going to tackle the tasks that you have to do, or something which might have happened in the past. So you realize that at the present moment, right, even in the midst of very difficult situations, it is not as bad as what we create in our minds in terms of past and future. There's a close friend of mine, and she lost her father a couple of years ago, and her father was sick for about 2 years before he eventually passed away. So I asked her a question one day. I asked her that which was bad, the time when your father actually died, or the time before that when you feared he would die? And she said the worst part was the 2 years when she feared she would lose him, and not the actual time when she actually lost him. So even if our worst fears actually come to fruition, we get the power to face them. But what we go through, the fearing it in our minds, is actually much bigger that we create. And that is because at that point in time, our mind is trying to live in that psychological future, and trying to create that future for us, even though the future does not exist at that point, because nobody knows the future. So our mind is linked to our identity, our whole self. And I've seen people who might have gone through some hardships 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, gone through very difficult situations when things like when they were psychologically or physically abused by people, and they lived through that trauma throughout the years. And there are some people who choose not to forgive for all their lives, for people who they think might have wronged them. And Tolle has a term for it. He calls it the brain body. So what we do is that we actually like our victim self at the point. And that victim self is a very strong sense of identity for us. And if we lose that, we feel that there's nothing that will remain of us. So we keep that alive. Even though that happened 30 years ago, I'm never going to forgive that person. And you kind of hold on to that grudge, and you keep that victim part of your life saying, And you do not make any attempt to understand circumstances under which the person might have behaved or behaved in that certain manner. But even though the event itself might have been a horrible event, but it's our choice at that point in time is that whether we let that event be at the time when it happened or whether we choose to live it every single day. And this identification with the pain body is a very strong identification. So each time what happens is that when you get deeply attached to somebody and when you get a sense of that person might have wronged us in some manner, then you want to have nothing to do with that person anymore. You want to cut it all off because you want to escape from the pain. You don't want to have a situation where things are in between. You want an all or nothing state at that point. And that is a way of trying to survive within that and trying to escape from the pain. Because you don't want to, you're afraid of dealing with your own emotions at that stage. So here, right, so there's this idea of clock time. Clock time is just the fact that this clock was scheduled at 4:30 p.m. today, right? And that is not the thing that causes stress. That is just things that help in planning. But it's more about the psychological mind that we create. What if? Right? What if this were to happen? What if this were not to happen? And those what ifs are the ones which create a lot of stress in our lives. So really, a difficult thing to do, but a sound advice I read somewhere is to look at your life as being born every single day. And that's very difficult because we have this whole big notion of this person that we are, right? And if you were to be born today, what happens to all the hard work and all the achievements that we've made until now? Being born today means that you have to redo everything again. And if you compare yourself with a newborn child, right? I have a 5-month-old boy right now, and when you see him, that he doesn't get stressed about the same thing that I might get stressed about, right? Because he has no sense of time. And we have this big sense of psychological time. And because of that, we are either living in the past or the future, and that is the one that causes stress. But if you look at, if you only worry about the things that you need to do in a single day, then there really is not much to worry about. There is a finite set of hours and a finite set of things to do, and you can tackle that on a given day. So this is what are these two different selves that you do. So there is your ego self, or what Tolle calls the mind, and then there is the soul self, or what Tolle calls the being. And when you identify with these two things, right, you have a very different set of emotions within that. The ego self is guided by fear a lot of the times, and the soul self is guided by trust. And both of these cannot go hand in hand. You can either be guided by fear or you can be guided by trust. Even if you do not trust the other person, you can trust in life. And the idea is that if you have survived, if you have been taken care of until this point, you'll be taken care of in the future as well. And to have that faith and to have that trust, and that is going to keep you going. And when people lose that sense of trust, that is when all the fear comes in, and we experience a whole range of negative emotions at that state. Okay? Now this ego is the one which makes us distinct from, so each one of us has a very different ego. But this sense of self, the soul self, right, or the being, is the same across all of us. So when I see myself as a soul self, or when I see myself as a being, I'll see the same being in all of you, in each one of you. And there'll be a sense of identification with every single person. But when I see myself as the ego, I'll see myself as different from you. And that is when I start judging you. And the judgment will arise at this state. So it's a choice that we make as to which one of these two that we choose to identify with. And the only way to identify with the being, with the self, is by focusing on the present, by being mindful of the current moment in a given day. So Tolle says, he talks about the idea of being an observer. So when things do not go the way you want them to be, right? At that stage you might get worked up, you might get very stressed. But if you talk to a friend, that friend may not get as stressed because that friend is kind of looking at it from a distance, but we get very involved in it at that stage. So even if we look at our own lives as an observer, by looking at it from a distance, even though it's happening with with ourselves. By doing that, even though if you can't change the situation, we can at least observe it dispassionately. And you realize that, and whenever we go through stress, if we call the bluff of the mind, saying that it's not me who is stressed, it's my mind who is stressed, that simple thought calls the mind's bluff, and you come back to the present moment. Because the mind is the one who's getting you to think about the future, getting you to think of the past, and rather than letting you stay at the present moment. So here, on the one side, you have guilt, regret, grievances, sadness, non-forgiveness. So there's too much of past and not enough present and present moment at that stage. Or you might have a lot of unease and anxiety and stress and worry about what if something happens or does not happen. So there's too much of the future. So when you focus only on the present, then you're grounded. And it's really a very simple exercise. It can be done through very simple ways of observing the room that you're in, looking at the books and the bookshelf, and looking at the table and looking at the plates in front of you, and experiencing every part of your own body. When you do that, you come back to the present. And that is when your thoughts are not able to wander all around. So it's really trying to observe your thoughts as an observer, and not thinking that you are your thoughts, that you are your minds. So this is an image of two birds which are sitting on the branches of a tree. And so there's this bird who is not eating anything, and this bird is trying to feed on fruits. And the fruit could be sweet, or the fruit could be bitter. And this is from ancient Indian scriptures called Upanishads. And this really, I think, is all the wisdom that comes from India. It's kind of encompassed in this one verse over here. So which talks about, like two birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the immortal self are perched on the branches of the self-same tree. The former tastes of the sweet and the bitter fruits of the tree, the latter tasting of neither calmly observes. But Tolle's idea, when I look at it, is a similar idea. Is that you have these two people inside you. Right? One person is getting completely worked up. One person is enjoying the movie. One person is likes something, does not like something, has tastes and has opinions and all of it. The other person is just an observer in there. It's a silent bird which is sitting on the branch of the upper branch of the tree over here. And there's one more verse which goes after that. It's again, the individual self, deluded by forgetfulness of its identity with the divine self, bewildered by his ego, grieves and is sad. But when that self, he or she recognizes the worshipful Lord, or in this case the being, or any of this name that you call for it, as one's own true self, and beholds the glory, this person grieves no more. Many of these scriptures might have been written by men, so you find the he over there. And we need to change that to she, or making it a he or she. So this is another of those verses by Kabir that I promised I'd show you later on. So it says that the lane of love is very narrow. It cannot accommodate two. When I was there was no God. Now that there is God, I am not. And you can replace the word God with love. Okay? So when I was there was no love. Now that there is love, I am not. So what happens in attachment is that you have this deep sense of ego. It's all about me, right? It's all my needs are not satisfied. And I'm not able to control, like things are not going my way. It's all about the ego at that point. But when there is love, it's not about oneself at all. It's all about identifying with the person you love in every single person in the world. If you have this notion and love for God, you see that God in every single person. If you really love your mother or your friend, you see that mother and your friend with every single person. So you're not alone at any point in time. Even when you're alone, you're secure in that love. And even when you're with people, you're secure in that love. It goes to that leftmost quadrant in terms of what we saw in terms of the positive sense of self and positive sense of the other. when we looked at that attachment quadrants earlier. But Kabir spent a lot of his time contemplating on this. As you kill your ego, you are able to recognize that the greatest self in every single person that you see. So when we are guided by fear, attachment leads to fear, and there's always a sense of losing when we are in this psychological time. But when we are guided by trust, then we are always secure. So it's a choice that we make at any point in time, whether we choose to be guided by fear and whether we choose to be guided by trust. And I see this as a constant exercise. I see that this needs to be constantly reinforced. Every time I talk about this, I learn this myself as well, because I might forget it. So it's something that needs to be reinforced and something which can be taught to oneself. This is a quote by Bruce Lee. So it says that empty your mind, be formless and shapeless like water. It says that water does not have its own sense of identity anymore. The water takes up the shape of whatever container it's put into. And if we were to look at my earlier talk about being born each day, right, then you do not have your own sense of your own shape. You're being born every single day and you're letting the events of the day guide you, rather than your own sense of self guide you. And when that happens, there's no stress at all, because you have no preconceived idea of how your day should be. Oh, I had a horrible day. So how did you decide the day was horrible? Because we had a certain idea of how we think the day should have been. And when it went differently, we thought it was horrible. And when it went the same, it was just normal. Even if we were happy, you realize that the really big happy moments were really a very few ones in your lives. But that was the day when I was really happy. All the other times when I was feared, you were somewhat in that in-between state, but not completely happy. And the more we start living in the present, you will find that every single moment and every single day becomes much happier. So one thing which is very, very dangerous out here is expectation. So every time we expect from people, and when we find that our expectations are not met, we start blaming. And one of the things which I've decided to do is to try never to blame. So every time a person does not live up to what I think the person should be doing, I try to come myself and reflect. And to be okay with myself again and then talk to the person without any blame at all. Rather than, because I know that I'm the one who's creating this pain or the suffering, not the other person. It's my mind who's doing it. So there when you do it right, so when the expectation is not met, you can be an observer in that state. But even if your mind is not feeling okay, you can just look at it separately as not identifying with your mind, and to think of ways to change the circumstance or to change yourself, and to try to understand the situation and to accept, and then to love, and realign your own expectations rather than trying to change the person, which is what we tend to do most of the time. And that doesn't work. If it worked, I would say go for it. If blaming would work, right? It doesn't work. Yeah, if it worked, we could all blame and it would have been a simple solution. But you find that the more we try to blame, the more the person tries to get away. And the more we accept, the more the person comes to you. Right? So even when you think in terms of what's practically the right approach, you'll find that this approach is more workable. Because you'll find that this person feels completely safe, the person is not judged anymore, and the person can really bank on you. And this is what develops trust. So in this stage, this is guided by fear, this situation, and this is guided by trust. And the only thing that we really have to check is our own expectation. So even very small expectations can be very dangerous. So you send a message and you don't get back a response. You think that's a very basic thing to ask for. It's not. It's a big thing to ask for. Every time when something doesn't happen, we say that can't I even expect this much? But we think that that's very basic, but that's actually very big. And trying to looking at expectations as something very dangerous and trying to curtail that gives us a lot of power, because by doing that we are giving the power to ourselves and rather than to the other person. And you get the most secure when you realize that whole being within yourself. So the big thing to realize is that you can only derive happiness from yourself and not from anybody else. You are the whole reservoir of happiness within you. And knowing that and realizing that is a central tenet. So happiness does not lie at the level of emotion. So when you disassociate yourself from the identity that feels emotion, whether pleasure or pain, that's the level at which you start feeling happiness. And that is when you have the identification with the being. in a deeper sense, because the mind is the one which is going out after pleasure or pain at that stage. So what to do when you go through these stressful moments? So one thing I've found helpful is that one thing is not to react. So when somebody says something insensitive to you, even if you're feeling bad at that point, if you react, right, you're giving ammunition to the one person who you should not be giving ammunition to because the person will not remember what the person said, the person will remember what you said at that point. So if we choose not to react, then we are actually able to stop that. And some basic forms that can help us in this is repetition. By repeating any word, or by focusing on our surroundings or a passage of a book, or focusing on a breath. All of these are various techniques that people have devised to be in the present moment. So that's the last slide. And here we talk about the idea that the favorite day is really today. Thank you.